Anyone who considers themselves a rugby league genius is having an awful tipping year. Not as awful as being a Titans or a Souths fan, but it's been a pretty bad year so far. It's taken over 5 weeks to go 8 for 8 for me, and the round 6. I don't know why Newcastle keep getting primetime games. Maybe it is the Pong Daddy, but they're hosting the Sydney Roosters. Now, Newcastle, did they finally find a winning halves combination? It's hard to know because it was the Dragons. I do think the last 2 weeks, despite a loss being in there, is the best they have looked, and going up against the Sydney Roosters, they are favourites, and that's because the Sydney Roosters may as well be playing their New South Wales Cup side. And the big question continues surrounding their halves combination. Now, it'll be Walker and Keary once again because there is still no Sand and Smith, but they're going to be missing a lot more than just him going up against the Newcastle Knights. But despite that, and I know this kind of contradicts itself because they were so poor in the first half, but they showed in that second half how good of a side they can be despite all the injuries that they do have. Now, that is due to them not having a salary cap still, but I'm going to tip the Sydney Roosters now at these two teams at their best, and if Kalen Ponga has a day out, it's hard to see the Newcastle Knights losing, and this is a pretty important game for both sides because they both have a losing record so far this year. And I guess if there's any teams that proved last year that they don't really need an early winning record, it is these two teams, but I'm going to go with the Sydney Roosters, obviously due to them missing a buttload of players. I'm only going to go them 1-12. Early game on the Friday, the Melbourne Storm, they host the Dogs, and if you remember back to 2023, the Dogs didn't look too bad in Melbourne. In fact, it took up until last week for them to have a better performance. Now, will they do that again? I don't think so. That second half of the Dogs is as concerning as much their first half had a whole lot of positives into it. Now, if they come out with the same aggression and the same effort they showed in the first half against the Roosters, then they can see them putting up a fight. And Melbourne didn't look great against the Brisbane Broncos. As good as the Broncos were, they were building a team with a lot of their key players out. So I am going to tip the Melbourne Storm. They look like a premiership heavyweight straight out of the bat this year. There was their first game with their full spine for the first time since 2022 last week. And I don't think back in Melbourne they're going to be losing to the Bulldogs. And I'm not trying to sound like an arsehole, Doggies fans, but that is just the truth. And it's been the truth like that for the better part of a decade now. The Brisbane Derby, the Broncos taking on the Finns. And the Broncos, I mean, they've got a losing record, but they are showing how good they are. Their depth is up there with Penrith. And don't take that quote out of context, but the Dolphins, they're sitting first. They've got to be doing something right. It has been a favourable draw, but hey, you can only play what's in front of you. And this is the team I put last in my ranking teams after round 1 video. So obviously Wayne's got the boys up from Redcliffe, and they're going to be hungry because the Broncos had their way in this fixture both times last year, and the Dolphins and Wayne, they'll be seeing this game as a very good opportunity to silence a few people. And the Broncos, they're still going to be without a buttload of players. In saying that, they did show a lot of heart in the past few weeks without them. But I'm going to tip the Dolphins. There's something about the Finns. It's still very early in the season. This is probably one of the reasons why I'm not going 8 for 8. And their forward pack, now they are going to be without Farnworth and Kafusi, but Tommy Flegler's been absolutely outstanding. The Hammer's been on fire, and I think they've got their halves combination that can take them into the future. It's the best Katoa's played, and it's the best the Hammer's played, and we know how good he was last year. So with the Broncos just missing a lot of key players out, and I want to have some fun, I'm going to take the Dolphins 1-12. Early Saturday sees the Warriors looking for 4 in a row back at home against the Manly Sea Eagles. Now, both teams got some great wins last week. The Warriors have looked good this entire season, whereas Manly, they're trying to find some bloody consistency. They lost to the Wooden Spoon favourites, only to go and beat the Premiership favourites. And while we do all know that Manly's winning the comp, it's a great opportunity because this is probably the hardest road trip in rugby league besides Penrith at the moment. And they haven't been bad this year, the Warriors, but the last 3 weeks they've been finally finding ways to finish off teams. And last week against South Sydney, who, well, they've been a bag of so far this year, but they looked really good and were able to get the killer blow and kept the foot on the throat. So it's going to be a hard game for Manly, but I'm going to, of course, tip the mighty Eagles because I do think the Warriors are deservingly favourites, and they're actually quite considerable favourites, but I'm going to tip Manly. If they can come out and play what they did last week, which wasn't even their best performance of the year, they'll go close. The best part for Manly, and it is the Warriors' greatest strength, has been the forward pack, so obviously that's the big challenge for Manly. And when it comes to the bench forwards, I think Manly may have the advantage, but if Adam Fanua, Blake, Tohu Harris and Mitch Mitch Barnett have a field day, then I can't see the Eagles getting over those Warriors. But if they can match them, they've got just as much strike, if not more, to cause an upset in the land of Australia's little brother. Middle game of the Saturday, the Eels are absolutely desperate for a win, and despite the Cowboys being in second, they are showing some vulnerabilities. They have the fourth worst defense despite sitting so high on the ladder, and they got exposed again against the Gold Coast Titans. Now, they were able to turn the momentum after the Titans looked like they were going to come back against the 12-man Cowboys side. Now the Eels, they're getting absolutely decimated. But I still think this is a great chance back at home, and the Cowboys, they seem to can't win in Sydney. However, I ain't not going to tip the Cowboys. There's a reason they're second. There's a reason the Eels have struggled without their key players so far. It looks like they're going to be missing a few more, including RCG through suspension. While the Cowboys cannot stop the other team from scoring points, I still think going up against a team without their main halfback, they're going to be able to score a few more points than the Parramatta Eels, and that's who determines rugby league wins. I know that may be shocking for some of you watching. The main game on Super Saturday sees the Rabbitohs taking on the Sharks. It's good for Fox League to watch us all get to see Jason Demetrio lose his job in real time. But in saying that, and I do mean this genuinely, I hope South Sydney turn up for this bloke, because any bloke, when his job's on the line, you better hope those dudes turn up for him. And there's all sorts of rumours that JD is playing for his job this week, so I expect South Sydney to be up for at least the first 20 minutes. If they're not, it doesn't matter how they go, you're sacking him immediately. Unfortunately, they've got to play the Sharks, who have looked really good despite that Tigers game, and they're coming off a bye. So I can't believe the Rabbitohs are still as favourable with the bookies as they are. I'm tipping the Sharks, and I'm tipping them 13+, because anyone who is crazy enough to tip South is probably just a Redfern Oval lover. Finally, a Sunday 2 p.m. game. The Tigers, they're taking on the Dragons. It's a great way to kick off the 2 p.m. Sunday time slot. Now, the Tigers, I thought, were pretty brave despite losing to the Dolphins, but this is one of those games I feel the Tigers love to lose, and the Dragons, despite not putting in 80-minute performances, they're still showing some good signs. I mean, had their chances against the Knights, they just couldn't finish any of them, and that was in the pissing down rain. Now, going to Campbelltown, probably the easiest road trip in rugby league. So, you know what? I love you, Tigers fans. I know you're enjoying the season so far, so I'm not going to shit on you, but I am going to take the Dragons 1-12. But don't be too upset, because if you win by rugby league math, the Tigers are better than Manly. And finally, the Raiders taking on the Titans, and Wyvern Butler, Raiders 13+. I don't know what the heck's going on with the Gold Coast Titans. Just by the NRL sheer logic, they're going to win eventually. They looked the best they did last week in that 10-minute period. Granted, it was against a 12-man team. So, yeah, until I can see it, until they probably get their win, I'm probably going to stay away from tipping them and saying that they're probably going to win next week, because Des Hasler's entire game plan this far has been for ambushing Manly. Yes, that's right, Titans fans. I'm saying that Des Hasler doesn't care about your club, and he's just used the first 6 rounds to orchestrate an ambush on Manly. So, Raiders 13+. There are my tips for round 6. I'm taking the Roosters. Ladies and gentlemen, let me know what your tips are for round 6 in that comment section down below. Subscribe if you haven't yet already. Smash that like button. Do it all, and I'll see you in the next one.